Okay, so in this module, we're going to talk about feedback and assessment in a broad way. We'll obviously be talking about it throughout the semester as well, so I just want to give you an introduction to the topic. So we'll begin by talking about why feedback matters. As you can imagine, the more feedback that students get, the more effort that they can put forward. In fact, there's been some research, and you can see that documented in your text, that students who receive feedback are more likely to work and persist on tasks as compared to activities where they don't get feedback. And it doesn't really matter whether that feedback's positive or negative. It's that just the feedback loop that seems to be really important in the process. In addition, obviously, that effort and increased, attention to the task is also going to lead to higher levels of achievement. So we know that the research really speaks to the fact that feedback is really important. So now let's take a look, and we can see an example in video games. As you know, there's a whole world of folks out there playing a lot of video games, and when you think about what really captures their attention and interest, it's really the feedback. So every move that you make, a bell's going off, different things are happening. You're finding out immediately whether you're on the right track or the wrong track. So that feedback really is what engages students in using video games. And clearly we can't mirror that in the educational arena, but we want to try to increase the feedback opportunities that we do provide. Because for many students, the feedback is just too few and too far between different assignments. And that's really one of the areas that helps actually distracts from motivation. So we want to try to increase that motivation by increasing the feedback opportunities. So here's another reason it's important for us to provide students with feedback. Students are not always accurate at self-assessing how well they're doing. In fact, there was an interesting study that was done by Karpik and Blunt. And as you can see here, if we take a peek here at the retrieval practice, which was students who tested themselves over and over while they were studying. This first box here, the verbatim questions, and the second box, the inference questions, all had to do with how accurate, how well they did on a test. And you can see that the students who did the testing, as a study strategy, did the best. And the students who repeated their studying, just studied a little bit or repeated their studying, they did not do as well as those who engaged in testing effect. However, when you ask those same students to make metacognitive predictions, you can see that students were not good at predicting at how well they knew the material. This yellow line here, again, the repeated studying group, this group thought they did the best. And as you can see, they did not do the best on the test. Whereas the retrieval practice group, they thought they did the worst when in fact they actually did the best. So here's some evidence that students are not always great at self-assessing. And here's the problem. When students are overconfident, which is what happens with that first area that we talked about in terms of repeated studying, they will end up stopping their studying actions too soon. And if they stop studying too soon, obviously the learning is not going to take place as much, and their performance will not be at the level that they desire. So that's really what's problematic. So now when we think about how we help students with feedback and assessment, a lot of it has to do with the goals that they set, because all the feedback should be linked to what goal it is that they are, trying to achieve. Otherwise, how do you know what you're aiming for, and how do you know whether you're on track or not? So let's take a few minutes to take a look at some of the research on goal theory. Well, many of you have probably heard of SMART goals. It's kind of all over the place. A lot of businesses use it, certainly use in educational arenas as well. And you can see here in front of you, here are the different elements of a SMART goal. Well, unfortunately, there really isn't that much literature, research support for the SMART goal process. So although it's something that's widely used, it's not really research-based. And I want to share with you a couple of the concerns. First of all, one of the areas is do goals really need to be realistic? And that is one of the components of the SMART goal. And the research is very much mixed on this. So some research says absolutely it does, and other research says no, not so much. So I guess this is really questionable of whether that needs to be an important part of the goals that we set. In addition, there's some redundancy in the SMART goals. To me, the specific and measurable, those are both important characteristics, but I don't know that they warrant two different components. Achievable, realistic, again, we're in that same arena where they're very similar and redundant in a sense. But perhaps the most disturbing part is the component that is not in the SMART goal, which is challenge. And challenge actually has a ton of research support. So if you look at the literature, and Locke and Lapham have done a lot of work in this area, challenging goals are going to lead to better results. And that doesn't, just speak to the educational arena. It also speaks to business, weight loss, whatever it might be. The bigger the goal you set, the more likely it is you're going to achieve at a high level. So we want to make sure that we're focusing on that. So I have come up with a ABCs framework that I've published, and I think that that kind of speaks to much of the research support that we have for goal setting. So the first one you can see here is aim high. That speaks to the challenge that we just discussed. Then the second one is believe in yourself. You have to have a high level of self-efficacy in order to achieve your goals. Caring and committing is going to focus on the motivational aspect, and then the specify, which there is a lot of research support and was linked to the SMART goal framework as well. It's also very critical. And the main reason that that's critical is the more specific it is, the easier it is for you to judge whether or not you're on track to meeting your goal. And that's that self-reflection process that you can see there in the last step. So as we said before, the research really speaks pretty clearly about this. Here's a quote from Luck and Latham: the highest or most difficult goals produced the highest levels of effort and performance. Again, this is across a variety of areas, not just in the academic world. Now, as a counseling psychologist, I worry a little bit about setting a goal that's too high, because then, of course, you may not meet with success. You may not achieve it. And what does that do to the person? Is there a sense of failure, and is that upsetting? And I came across this really neat study by Reynolds and Baird. And what they did is they tracked, as you can see, a large number of students, almost 13,000 of them. And they asked them a question: what level of education are you planning to achieve? High school diploma, associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, etc. And they tracked these students across time to see whether or not they actually did achieve those goals. And then they also assessed them on a variety of measures, including some of the emotional depression measures, to see whether or not, if they didn't achieve the goal, was there an emotional consequence to that. So the first thing that you can see here from this chart is that almost no one actually exceeded their goal. So about half of them achieved their goal, a little less than half fell short, and only 8% actually went above. So that really shows you that if you set your bar here, it's not that likely that you're going to go above that bar, and you're, got a 50-50 shot or so of achieving it. But here's the interesting part of the study, is that they found that there was no evidence of emotional cost, regardless of whether or not they achieved their goal. So students, if I just go back a second, if you compare this group of students to this group of students, those who fell short to those who achieved, there was no difference in terms of depression levels. In fact, they did find that the higher expectations at the start, whether or not they actually achieved that goal, actually was associated with lower levels of depression. So by having higher aspirations, it seemed to be connected to lower depressive levels later on. The second component, is believing in yourself, and self-efficacy plays a very significant role in goal achievement, because if you don't believe you can achieve that goal, you're not going to put forth a great amount of effort, and then consequently you won't achieve that goal. And you can see here, the students who have high levels of self-efficacy are much more likely to persist, especially when faced with some kind of setback or difficulty, which is often going to happen. So we really need students to have that high self-efficacy. And here are some suggestions about how we can help students build self-efficacy. So if we want to help them, set these goals that are in a high manner, but also that they believe in themselves, we want to engage in these kinds of activities. The care and commit really has to do with motivation. So caring about the goal, you need to be passionate about it. I mean, you're not going to be motivated and exert effort on something that you just don't care about. And making a commitment. So it's not just like, yeah, it might be a good idea to eat healthier, but making a very firm commitment that, you know what, I'm going to take actions to eat healthier. I'm going to take actions to improve my study strategies. That commitment level makes a big difference. As you can see from this quote, intrinsic motivation, which is that internal motivation, is one of the strongest predictors really of success. And that's why we really want to try to make sure the motivation is a critical component. You can also see here that a high level of commitment matters, whether or not it's a low goal or a high goal, but especially matters when it's a high goal. So higher level of commitment really matters when you're doing that raise the bar, really aim high kind of approach. Makes much more likely you'll meet with success. Now, specific goals are also essential. When your mom said do your best, you didn't end up doing your best, because what is your best? How do you define that? How do you know whether it's happened? So the research shows that do your best goals really don't result in students doing their best. Instead, we want to set a very specific target so that students can track their progress and determine whether or not they're on track to meet with success. And when you do have that specific goal, you're going to exert much more effort, and you'll also be able to know, as I said before, whether or not you are on track to achieve your goal. And then the last component of the ABCs model is self-reflect. How are you doing? You check up on your progress. You have to set up a schedule so you know when you want to check on your progress. If it's a semester goal that you have, you might want to do that at various different points throughout the semester, maybe even on a weekly basis, so that you can make adjustments as needed. The whole point of checking is as if things are not on track, well, then you have to do something different in order to get back on track. And that's really a critical part of the goal setting process. So now that we've talked a little bit about goals, we want to talk about different types of feedback that students can use to improve what they're doing. One type is cognitive feedback, and that happens really while they're studying or while they're doing their homework. So it's a process type goal. So, if you're studying for a test, how will a student know whether or not they should stop studying? Have they learned enough of the content at a level of mastery that's going to help them achieve their goal? Well, of course, there's online practice tests and flashcards and different things they can use to assess that knowledge. And I think most students are already kind of naturally engaging in this process, but maybe not so much in a formal way. And we might be able to help them formalize that process so that it's more structured and meaningful. The outcome feedback is something that I think students don't often do because that comes post the grade. So after the exam is over and you get that grade, students often look at the grade and then push it aside and move on to the next task. What we really want students to do is to be able to use the feedback from that test or that presentation or that paper so that they can learn from that experience and then apply it to the future actions that they take as a student. So when we think about how we can help students increase, the opportunity of learning from feedback, we can do that through scaffolding assignments. There's a couple different ways to do that. See over here on the left, low stakes to high stakes. So we can ask them to complete the same kind of task. So let's say, for instance, you're going to ask students to work on case studies throughout a semester. Well, perhaps when you're first doing this case study, it doesn't count at all. So it's a no stakes kind of assignment. And then in the beginning, maybe it only counts for a very small portion of the grade. But by the end of the semester, that same assignment can be a higher stakes grade, a bigger percentage of your grade, because they should have developed that skill set along the way. And they should have been able to use the feedback from all these other case studies to help them really engage in an effective analysis of the case. Another approach is to break down assignments, and English faculty are really good at this because they will often ask students for kind of check-in points. Let me hear what your topic is, what kind of sources are you using, let me have an outline or draft, and that really can help to make sure that students are getting good feedback. It's very frustrating for a student to do an entire paper or presentation and totally miss the mark because they've exerted all this effort and they went down a path that wasn't the right path, I guess, and they often feel quite a sense of defeat at the end of the day. So what we want to do is try to help avoid that. We want to make sure that their product that they create is on target and will meet the goal that they have. So we can do some check-ins and providing feedback along the way. Another great way to do, increase feedback is by linking assignments, because the truth is, as faculty, it's very hard for us to do all these check-in points. It's very time-consuming, especially when you have a large number of students. So although that might be the ideal, it may not always be manageable for you as the faculty member. So another way that you can do that is to link. So for instance, one of the ways that I've done that is I used to have a paper and a presentation that were on separate topics. But by putting them on the same topic, then what happens is they can use the feedback from the paper after I grade that to then influence how they end up packaging their presentation and ultimately doing their presentation. So I build in different steps. I do ask for a draft of the paper beforehand. Then they use that feedback to create the paper. After they have the paper feedback, they use that feedback to help structure the presentation. And then that really ends up with a higher level product when they actually do the presentation in front of the class. So I find that that works out well. So I hope that you can try something like that as well. So let's talk just for a minute, and we will be talking more extensively about this. What are some of the characteristics of effective feedback? Well, it's connected to some kind of standard. So that's where the goal comes back in, right? So what was the goal of the assignment, and how well, did the student meet that goal, or, how far are they progressing towards meeting that goal? And that's why it's really critical. The rubrics can really be handy tools here because it helps students know what the expectations are, and then you can let them know whether they got all the way over to the, you made it place, or whether they're kind of a work in progress and what they might need to enhance in order to fully achieve their goal. You want to make sure that it's informative. So something that says good job might be nice and might make them feel good about the assignment, but the truth is it doesn't inform them as to, what they want to do in the future. What was so great about this that I want to make sure I do the next time around as well? Or if if you say something like, this is not well organized. Okay, well, to them, they probably thought it was, so what would help them organize it? Instead, if you targeted things like, if we used headers, or what if you tried this this topic first and then you put this one second, do you see how that might flow better? Providing them with some suggestions. The more specific and constructive it is, the more helpful, and obviously, the more the merrier. So feedback, we definitely want to make sure that it's often. We want to make sure they have that. Again, go back to that video game model again, so to remind you of how frequent feedback really does influence things. The last thing I want to mention here is that students do have emotional reactions to feedback. So it's important for us to think about how students might interpret what we have to say and make sure we're catching in a way that they'll be able to take it in, use it, and find it to be valuable. All right, well, that's the introduction. We'll be certainly diving into these topics in more length as we move throughout the semester.